Yeah, so I mean, Amandeep introduced me very nicely. I just wanted to just kind of want to dial it back a little bit to kind of my origin story, how many people, my origin story is not unlike the story of many other Punjabis in the diaspora. My parents had an arranged marriage. When my, grandparents went to go see my father for the first time, my nana, nani, my maternal grandfather and maternal grandmother, they're checking him out. They come back home to tell my mom about him. They walk through the door, and my mom approaches my grandfather, asking a question about, how is he, what does he look like, and all that. My grandfather kind of makes a kind of a joking kind of jab to my mother, saying that, you would like him because he also wears ripped jeans, kind of like you wear, kind of taking a jab at my mom for not wearing nice clothes as well as my dad. And my nani, my grandmother, responded saying that, "Sheran de mu tote nahi hunde," like face of a tiger is never washed. To say that, don't judge him just based on his appearance. He has many other qualities. He's accomplished, he's educated, he's in Sikhi. And that one proverb, utilized in that way, kind of won my grandfather over and won my mom over. And then later that week they got married. So um, just to show you how proverbs have been used in the past, kind of a story that we've been told growing up about how my parents met and all that. We heard these proverbs growing up. Grandparents use them, parents use them. Um, Proverbs are utilized by, I've heard them by teachers in various arts like music. People use them, martial arts, people use them. They're entrenched in Punjabi culture. You hear them in different songs, you hear them in movies. If you are listening to like scriptural discourse, katha, you'll hear them there by kathavachaks. So they show up everywhere, right? And these proverbs, wherever they go, they carry along with them, parcels of Punjabi wisdom. And this book is an exploration into that. So I just want to try out to see how the audio is.
That's been much better than before, but there were still points where it broke up. So, I mean, it's one of those kind of impossibilities, really, to try to resolve. It's probably internet rather than having a microphone around you.
I see. I can switch computers as well if you give me like 5 minutes.
Do you think that is? Do you think that has a? Have you found it with that computer? Was that the same computer you used for the talk a few weeks ago?
Yes, it was, but yeah, it is a tablet, so maybe that's why. But yeah, we can swap it if you want to just talk about.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Okay.
You're sounding good now.
Okay.
Good.
So like I mentioned, the book is a compilation of these 54 proverbs. This is kind of the layout of the book. People have asked me, why I picked 54, and I'm gonna just kind of answer that question right at the start. There's really no good answer besides the fact that, in the Eastern traditions, people think about 108, the number 108, as being really auspicious, spiritual, religious, kind of a heavy number, almost serious. And we wanted to kind of make this book really light and fun, easy to toss around and all that. So we thought, we're just going to cut it in half. And that's how we ended up at 54. So to those who haven't seen the book, this is kind of the layout of the book. Each page has one proverb on it. It's written in Gurmukhi. It's transliterated into English, translated on the left side, and then a little bit of context is written on beneath that as well. So it's a tiered approach that's going to be useful to a couple of different generations. The older generations who know Punjabi, they'll be able to just look at the Gurmukhi and be able to read it, and automatically the meaning, the stories, the sayings that they've heard around this, that'll come to them. To the generation maybe that was born in the West, but speak Punjabi at home, but don't know how to read Gurmukhi, they can get, they'll get the gist from reading the transliteration, and who those who are just born in the West don't really have a grasp of Punjabi can just read the left-hand side, and that'll be useful to them as well. So this is how the book is laid out. There's a question here about illustrations in the book. This version doesn't have illustrations, but that may be a possibility for the future. So one of the reasons that I kind of went down this path in terms of Proverbs is because I found Proverbs really interesting, because it demonstrates a very important point that we often overlook when we think about language. Language is a vehicle through which thought is articulated. So language develops in a certain context. It doesn't develop out of nowhere. It doesn't develop in a vacuum. It develops as the culture is developing. So language reflects the culture around it. So the type of language you use even largely governs how you think about certain things. So people say to think in a language is to feel and to see the world in a particular way. And to change somebody's language is essentially to change how they think. So looking at this, for example, if you say something like spaghetti vargi siddhi, automatically loses the spaghetti out of it. This proverb here holds that typical Punjabi type of sarcastic humor to it as well, right? That you can see, and kind of reading these, it like brings you into that mentality as well. It's using an age-old treat that's been enjoyed for centuries. Actually, not long you mentioned the Suraj podcast. In one of the stories about the Suraj podcast, so this is a text written 200 years ago. It's talking about one of the Guru's weddings, Guru Tegh Bahadur's weddings, and it mentions how they were giving out jalebis, to the people that had come to the weddings. So even if you're engrossed in the Western world and habits and the culture and the language, reading some of these proverbs and using them, it automatically brings you back to the Punjabi culture and Punjabi thinking and humor, which I enjoy. And they can be very lighthearted, like this one here, or they can kind of change, and they can go the opposite side as well. So I'm just going to skip this one here. And the proverbs can be really lighthearted and fun, but they can also be philosophically heavy and can be quite somber as well. So this one here, I've illustrated this with a painting of Guru Gobind Singh, because sources from the 18th century and the 19th century both tell a story about how Guru Gobind Singh mentioned this proverb being "It da jawab patthar." But first, how I translated this as the response to a stone thrown at you is a brick. The principle behind this proverb is one of, escalation of force. When I say this, it's a difficult proverb because literally, it da jawab, the response of an it in Punjabi meaning a brick, and patthar meaning a rock. So it's actually quite reversed, but I switched it around in the translation to ensure that the principle, the meaning behind the proverb is conveyed properly, because contextually, for those who don't know, in the past in Punjab, a brick, there was, not what an English speaker who grows up in the West would think of a brick. Bricks were made from material which was rather soft, they're very small, and a patthar would be the opposite. A stone would be, quite large, very big, hard, heavy. So to convey the meaning of the proverb properly, I switched this around for the modern audience who's going to be engaging with this book. And this does show how a literal translation of the proverb, may not convey the right meaning, or convey, in fact, the opposite meaning. If I had said, to the response to a brick is a stone, it might suggest, a de-escalation of force. But, that would be totally inconsistent in the way that we see this proverb being used over time. So again, I mentioned this illustration. of a portrayal of Guru Gobind Singh on the right-hand side here, and how this proverb is used in both 18th and 19th century texts, historical records, talking about Guru Gobind Singh's life. And this is a story wherein Guru Gobind Singh is leaving Anandpur after 1704. He's on the move. They meet with another community leader a head of a Dadu Panthi community. His name is Jatram, who had heard about the martyrdom of the sons of Guru Gobind Singh, and they suggest, that yes, an atrocity has happened, but at this point, it's probably best to practice forgiveness, essentially forgive and forget. And basically, in this battle, like this poetry battle between Guru Gobind Singh and Jatram, it includes this line about Itda Jawab Patthar, in the context that, yes, forgiveness is the path for those adopting a saintly mentality, but for those who are fighting against oppression, in that context, the Itda Jawab Patthar mentality, the response to a stone is a brick, is the supreme mentality that no, we'll face them head on and we will escalate against them to stop this atrocity. And it's mentioned here that, in that story, everybody laughs and realizes a different context and there are principles in each. And what I love about this is that it just doesn't get used in Sikh literature, but in Punjabi songs as well. In fact, I'll play a little audio clip here shortly. The lyrics to this song were written during the British Raj in India. And this is towards the end of the British Raj. The songs of rebellion that arose during that time, which I'll play for you here. One of them includes this proverb. So I'll just play that here for you guys. So I hope that clear. Is that loud and clear for everybody?
It came across really well. Thank you.
Oh, okay, perfect. So these lyrics were written, in the early 1900s. Recently, so this is a song called Farangi Ralke by Specialists in True School. It's interesting that these lyrics were written in the early 1900s, but they have taken it, and I think this song was produced in the early 2000s, maybe 2010. But you can see now that, okay, it's used in the 1800s, it's used in the 1700s, now it's used in the early 1900s, now it's used in the early 2000s. This proverb is carrying itself through. For those who didn't get the lyrics there, it's basically saying that the line is, "Itda jawab hun patthar nal davange." So we're gonna respond to the British basically by, escalating force against them using that "Itda jawab" proverb there. So, this is what I really love about the proverbs, is that they kind of carry through time, and they take their principle with them where they go. And just regarding kind of the purpose as well behind the book here, before we kind of jump into more playful aspects of the proverbs. Just changing slides here. Oops. So when people think about Punjabi heritage, preservation, obviously we have UKPHA here doing a great job. It manifests in many different ways. So, people think about Punjabi competitions. This is if you ask people about, how is Punjabi culture being preserved, people think about, dance competitions, Punjabi competition, Bhangra competitions. You hear about Punjabi music now mixing with Western music, crossovers to the mainstream. You have this new surge of diaspora community who are engaging with instruments, from back home, like the tol, the sarangi, tumbi, there's a new appeal amongst people in the West to play some of these instruments. You have festivals like the Darbar Music Festival, gathering Indian classical musicians from all around the world to perform in England. You have in the cuisine scene, you have many, tons of Indian restaurants. Punjabi food is basically mainstream essentially nowadays. This is a photo of Punjab in central London. Like I mentioned, we have institutions like UKPHA, organizing these talks. Book club is another way we can explore the literary wealth that we have in the community. And I think diving into these proverbs though as well, the proverbs, the idiom, Punjabi poetry of the past, is one way to keep many of the core principles of the culture moving forward in the diaspora as well. But specifically in terms of language preservation, in Punjab, within the past century, we've had movements like the Punjabi Suba movement in the 60s, late 50s it started, where there's a big push to preserve and to make sure the Punjabi language is utilized. Basically, this resulted in an increase in literature production in Punjabi. A lot of books started coming out during this time, collecting Punjabi proverbs, publishing them. So there are books in Punjabi. When I get back on the video after this, I'll show you this. There's one by Professor Bikram Singh Kumman. There are books that have come out during that time, during the 60s and 70s, that have searched out and gathered these Punjabi proverbs, translated them in Punjabi, so they aren't lost in Punjab. And even today, I know that in the schools, in like primary schools in Punjab, they do teach these proverbs to people, to the students there, to ensure that the new generation growing up, if they've not been hearing them at home, they will be explained to them, they will be taught in the school in Punjab. But for those, that's all fine and well for those people who can read Punjabi or who have access to Punjabi education system out there. But for the diaspora community, even if you can read Punjabi, so that's the thing, there may be books in Punjabi about Punjabi proverbs, but to those people in the West who are reading it, they may not understand the books. And even if you can read Punjabi, some of the meaning, the context is quite different from the literal translation of the lines. So the project was largely to increase this. It was an attempt to kind of preserve some of the proverbs that we have and display them to the West here. And the result of that, kind of the feedback that we've got from that, has been incredible so far. It's been about a year since this book has come out, and I did want to share with you some feedback that we've got about it. So the biggest and most meaningful feedback that I got about the book was that when people took the book home, it became this kind of intergenerational bridge. It bridged the gap between the generations, allowed for 3 to 4 generations to come together, share memories, share stories, talk about the culture and have some laughs. For us in the diaspora, there are significant generational gaps. Obviously, education-wise, often there's a big disparity between kids born here and their grandparents. Linguistically, a lot of the kids don't know Punjabi, can't have a good dialogue. Even if they do know a little bit of Punjabi, they can't have real meaningful conversations with their grandparents. And socially, obviously, there's a gap there because of the change in modernity. You have different expectations of how kids should behave, and all the small and big things that cause tension between generations. Yet amongst all of that, when people came home and they brought these proverbs, just showed it to their parents or their grandparents, they told me it's created great times of sharing and bonding. Grandparents telling stories about when somebody used a specific proverb in a certain way. Parents also saying this, they've heard so and so say this when they were young, but these proverbs really don't get utilized that much as a culture is kind of fading away. So for me, that was the biggest feedback, that I really didn't expect that level of engagement. I thought it might be used by some people in my generation as a way to kind of have a laugh with their grandparents, maybe use it as a quick joke or a quick quote. But I didn't realize kind of the stories, the moments, the memories, all associated with the different proverbs and the lines used. So that was one really big, meaningful, feedback that I received from people who have got the book. So in addition to that, there's also seeing this book kind of travel in circles outside of the Punjabi community. So I had the fortunate ability to send it to Erica Badu, who really enjoyed the book. Erica Badu is a very famous artist. She shared it amongst her followers, millions of followers on Instagram. Had the ability to share it with Jagmeet Singh, federal leader here of the NDP in Canada. And if you actually go on my Instagram, you can see a video of Jagmeet kind of reading and explaining some of these proverbs as well. He really enjoyed it. When I was in England, Sonny and Shay from the BBC were very kind to bring me on to their show to talk about it. And in addition to that, we've got orders from all around the world, Paris, Australia, New Zealand, all across Europe, in Mexico. So it's in places where I never thought they would be an interest. It was just one of those unexpected positives that came out of the book. But to those who maybe know the culture, know the lay of the land in terms of the religious, cultural, social scene, a lot of the proverbs that are in the book, they may not seem so foreign, because a lot of the sentiment behind the proverbs, the meaning, the values behind some of the proverbs that I said, they take form in real life. So for example, in the book, there's a proverb that says, Vandakai, Kandakai, Ardakai, Hardakai, meaning sharing your food is like eating sugar. Eating alone is like eating bones. And this is, basically akin to the Western sharing is caring. Speaks about the benefit of sharing your food, and, how it's, basically it's important to share your food, and that's what's most enjoyable, when you share your food with somebody else. And obviously, for those who know, the concept of langar in the Sikh tradition, especially nowadays, given the pandemic, people are still going out there and distributing langar. It's a core value that we have in the community, and you can see it, actively take form today.
Jvala, can you say that one again? It's a bit slower in Punjabi, because as you said it, then translated it, and I want to go back.
This is a tongue twister, which also makes, the proverbs are fun to say like that. So, Vandakai, Kandakai, Ardakai, Hardakai. So Vandakai, to share your food.
Right.
Kandakai is like eating sugar.
Yeah.
Ardakai, to eat it separately, to not share your food. Hardakai is like eating bones, basically.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So, if you say it really quickly, it's a bit of that, it's a bit of a tongue twister. So, like I was saying, these proverbs, they manifest in different ways. There's, culturally, we can think about how pluralistic the community is. There's a proverb here, Hath diyan panje ungla eko jahi nahi hundiyan. So the 5 fingers of the hand are never all the same. So, this speaks to the kind of principle that, not everybody's the same. Everybody has their own purpose. Everybody has their own use. Everybody has their own value, which is very something we always need to remind ourselves, especially given the current today, what's happening. And then socially, you can think about just, pedagogy, how people are taught, just kind of principles that people hold dear. There's a proverb here in the book, Sehaj pake so meetha hoy. Slow growth ripens sweetest. So this is akin to, the Western slow and steady wins the race. obviously, the idea that, not to rush into anything, to let things mature slowly, gradually, to take your time. And yeah, so there's quite a variety of proverbs in the book. Like I mentioned, there's sarcastic ones like the jalebi vargi siddhi, straight as the jalebi. There's serious ones that I mentioned, like irtada jawab patthar, the response to stone is a brick. There's even strategic ones. There's one siddhi ungli nal kyo nahi nikalda. So you can't get butter out of a bottle with a straight finger. So this is kind of like akin to the Western, the wind does not break the tree that bends, so sometimes you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit to get your way, in a sense. So, I mean, we can kind of make this a little bit more interactive at this point to have other people jump in. But I did want to pose a question to the people as well who are listening here. Because, when we think about Punjabi Proverbs today, one of the main feedbacks that I got as well is that, people said, oh, I never heard of these. I never knew that there was such a vast amount of these, and I've only put 54 in here. The books that I've sourced these proverbs from and used their translations, they have many, there's many different books, there's quite a lot. And, the new generation had no idea about this. And I wanted to pose a question that, is this a problem of, the newer generation not knowing the language? Is there a language barrier here? Or is it a problem of, these proverbs are irrelevant in the sense that, the values, the sentiments behind the proverbs, they're slowly disappearing, they're kind of fading away. So yeah, it would be an interesting discussion to have with everybody. And then Amadeep, I can send it back to you, and then we can just discuss some more proverbs.
Yeah, let's do that. So thanks for that, Jvala. So we're going to do a bit of so why don't you put your hands up if you want to share a proverb with us. Put your hand up, and I'll open the line, and you can share them. And we're going to do something else with it, aren't we, Jvala? We're going to do a bit of a book giveaway. Jvala, yes. You can be the judge. The top few, I don't know how many. Let's see how many good ones we get. Then I'll grab your details afterwards, and we'll do a signed book giveaway. Rightio. Oh gosh, look, lots of people. Oh my goodness, lots and lots of people. Jvala, do you want to have a shot at just opening your camera? Because the sound has been really good over the last period. So if it goes bad, I'll ask you just to switch it off. I'm going to keep mine off. All right. I'm going to, let's start with Jassa then. Jassa, why don't you kick off? You're right at the top of my list. Jassa, unmute yourself. Accidental click. All right, no worries. Satminder Semi, why don't you go next? Sami, over to you.
Mute, okay. It's not so much about a proverb. Nice to see you, Amandeep, anyway. And it's a question about why Punjabi is the only language that's got the same word said twice, but with a different inclination, like chachu pilo, roti choti khalo, sonsu lo. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And why is it just only happening in Punjabi and no other language?
I mean, it's a good question, but I wonder if that's not in the English language. I'm not aware of other languages that do it or don't do it, but I would imagine that would be a normal occurrence, to be honest. I don't see that as especially unique. I think
it doesn't happen in English, it doesn't happen in French, it doesn't happen in any other Latin language. Doesn't even happen in South Asian languages.
It's a good question.
Yes,
anyone can propose a
book on that.
There is this funny thing in Punjab that you see a lot, is that this real love of little rhyming couplets as well. You see it a lot in political posters, little advertising slogan, much more so than you see in the West. It just seems, it does seem
But Punjabi is so common. Chaju pilo, drink liao. You know, wherever you look at it, it just keeps coming up.
It's interesting. Maybe there are listeners on the call here who can think of other examples. I can't think of any examples at the moment. That would be interesting, exploration into that. There are people who are looking deeper linguistically into Punjabi specifically. There's a lot of good research on that. Like I mentioned, since the 60s, Punjabi Suba movement, there's been an increased examination into Punjabi specifically. But one thing we do have to realize is most Punjabi speakers are actually on the Pakistan side of Punjab, which is also very interesting to think about how that divide had really separated us and really kind of limited us in our ability to examine it as well, because we've isolated a huge portion of our community. I see a comment here saying that in English, rhyming Cockney slang.
Yeah, but Cockney slang is very different, because Cockney's rhyming slang is putting a quote for another word, like apples and pears is stairs. So they'll just say apples and pears rather than stairs. But with Punjabi, it's a proper word that's been repeated, but with a different inclination onto it. Kha khulo, roti choti liao, bat boot lo.
Let's move on to some. Let's move on to Proverbs. Sammy, thank you very much.
Something sensible next. Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to speak to you soon. Call me, yeah?
I will.
Cheers.
Everyone give Sammy a follow on Twitter as well if you want to see one of the finest penmen in the world. He's an extraordinary calligrapher. At Satwinder Semi. Right. Let's move on. Pam Kuller, over to you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Pam.
I just put my hand up because I wanted to share a quote.
Go for it.
Yeah, this was one. It's funny that my parents were just here. My dad's 80, and so he obviously grew up in Punjab and came here in the 1960s. So he knows lots of quotes. So he gave me this one because I was saying, oh, can you remember any? So it's lag gayi nalo tut gayi changi jehdi bekadran di yari. Have you heard that one before?
I have not. No.
Okay.
You want to explain that one for us?
So it's basically, I guess if you're in a relationship with somebody and they're disrespecting you, so it's better not to be in that relationship at all. So that's why it says lag gayi nalo tut gayi changi jehdi bekadran di yari. So it's like being in a, probably more like a romantic relationship, I think, with somebody who's not appreciating you.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely going back to the social, how to interact with people type of mentality. That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Okay, bye.
Biddy.
I've got a couple of these. I grew up with these, so I'm happy to share them. One is Ulta Chor Kotwal Ko Dante. So, Jvala, I don't know if you've heard that. And the second one is Kade Gade nu bhi baap bana laida.
Okay, go on, break that down for us, Indy. You can't just leave us hanging.
Yeah, can you?
Okay, so the first one is Ulta Chor Kotwal Ko Dante. Ulta Chor is a thief who's been caught by the policeman. Oh, Kotwal nu dante hai. Kotwal haga the caretaker of the cell, the police cell. So the thief is behind bars, but he's scolding the policeman, or the thief is scolding the policeman, saying, so that's where the praise comes up. When someone is being cheeky, so the chore is the chore, but he's scolding the policeman. So that's where it comes. Ulta chore kotwal ko dante. And you'll get many situations like that where you get a cheeky guy who's in the fault, getting defensive and aggressive.
Interesting.
So that's a famous one that I grew up with in my childhood. And the second
so you
one,
heard that from your parents or your grandparents?
I grew up in Kenya and we spoke Punjabi, and all the Sikhs in Kenya speak Punjabi. They don't really speak English to each other, which is slightly different to British Sikhs. And I live in London now, so
Yeah.
But I grew up, with because the community in Kenya went there 100 years ago and they're frozen. They still believe in the 100-year-old Punjabi proverbs.
Awesome.
And
the second one?
And the second one was Kade gade nu bhi baap bana leda, which means if you want to get something done, sometimes you even have to make a donkey your father.
Interesting.
Kade gade nu bhi baap bana leda, if you want to get something done. Swallow humble pie, make a donkey of your dad if you want something done. So these are kind of, stuff we grew up with. We have many, but I want to read your book first in case I'm repeating them.
Well, you might
be those
free one, Indy.
Yeah. All these the three that I've been mentioned here are not in the book. So there's a wealth of these that people know, right? And yeah, we can, I'm going to definitely get some more people on and we'll hear some more.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing those.
Thank you, Indy. Next one, Jaspreet Kaur.
Hello.
Hi, Jaspreet.
Hi, sorry, I didn't know if you guys would be able to hear me. I don't know very many. I would really love to win this book though. Meri Billy Menu Meow is like a favorite that I know me and my sisters love to just joke about and say all the time, which is basically just about like, your cat talking back to you. And usually it's just something that we imagine our moms have probably said to us quite a bit.
Right. No, that's wicked. Yeah, I've seen that been used absolutely in films, more recent films, and like even on Instagram. I think there's like an Instagram page with that name on it, I think. But yeah, that's an awesome one. The joke ones are, yeah, you can kind of see the Punjabi humor come through them, right? So, which is awesome.
There must be, Jvala, there must be crude ones as well that you couldn't put in your book. I'm not asking you to.
I mean,
well, you might. We're all grown-ups here.
Ones that I had to exclude from the book included ones like, because the dictionaries that I was looking at, like the Akan Kosh, the proverb dictionaries, they did include all of like whatever ones people were saying, and they did include ones about women and caste and and drugs, alcohol and stuff. So obviously those type of ones I didn't include, because we wanted to make this for everybody, for kids who can kind of enjoy this as well. But yeah, I didn't go down that way.
All right, I was trying to goad you into telling us some. Right. Pritpal Buller. There you go. Sorry, unmute yourself. That was my fault. Unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Amandeep. Hi, Jwala. I'm not sure if it's the sort of thing you're after, but my mum struggled to remember any from her childhood. But the one she came up with was Maja Mine Botakote Feda Fide, which means mum's not been born yet, but the sun's already walking on the roof of a building. And it refers to a fire, because when you light a fire, the smoke is already up in the air before the fire lights.
Right. Interesting. Where did you hear that one? You said your mom was telling you?
My mum, yeah, that's the only one she could remember from her childhood.
Do you remember what context that she heard that? Was somebody using that?
So it's just something she remembers hearing when she was younger. Yeah.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, the context is the important one, isn't it? Like, how do you translate each of these? What I'm hearing, I want to know like, how do you use them in a modern, not a modern context, but yeah, what's it trying to say? Because we're so used to English ones, aren't we?
It may well be to do with sometimes it can be hard to light a fire, but yeah, you'll create lots of smoke. So it could be something that's come out of that sort of frustration of it, perhaps.
It's interesting. One feedback that I did get is that when people took the book home, they did say things like, my parents had heard this proverb used in a different context. So there are like multiple meanings, which is quite normal amongst, proverbs and like idioms as well, right? A lot of them have multiple meanings that you can that people use in different contexts, different circumstances, different situations as well. So hearing the situation and the context behind the proverb, bring it to light as well. which is
Sure.
wicked. If people could share that as well. But thanks for sharing that one. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's on the chat window. I don't know if you've seen that. You probably haven't. But Pam just said, I think it means running before you can walk, right? So the child's not just walking, but like run up the stairs and is on the roof of the building. I think that makes sense. Right. Let me pick a few more names. Aisha Hassan.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
It was really a question because, well, first of all, my parents are from Pakistan, so we're Muslim, we're not Sikh, but they are Punjabi, and it's interesting because I grew up listening to them speak with each other, and that's how I learned my Punjabi. And it was a question actually for Jvala. A few years ago, I mentioned the proverb, you've probably heard the proverb in English, which is red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning, red sky at night, shepherd's delight. And I happened to say it in front of my mum, and she right away came up with a Punjabi version of it, and I was stunned because it was word for word almost the same thing. And I just wanted to ask if you know that at all in the Punjabi?
No, not at all. I'm not even quite sure what that means. Maybe you could explain that in English as well for us.
Oh, it's just, it's a reference.
British shepherd's pie.
Right, yeah, it is a British one. It's a reference to, you know, if you ever see a red sky in the morning, it just means that it's going to rain later. And actually, if you see the red sky at night, then it's not going to rain the next day. It's a predictor of the weather, which obviously we're very obsessed with here in England. But apparently, there's a very similar Punjabi one which has the same meaning. I thought you might know it.
No, yeah. So you got me on that one. But you can share it with us as well if you know it, or if you
No,
remember.
I'll have to ask.
Okay.
I'll have to ask my mum.
No worries. Very interesting though. It's it shows kind of, it seems very like British, right? That proverb, but yeah, they are very cross-cultural as well. Like a lot of these have very similar like English equivalents. There's one in here, Sher ne sada masi khana, like a tiger's always going to eat meat, which I've seen in this book. And there's a line in Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Arjan says it, Singh roche sadapojad mas, like a tiger's always going to eat meat, or is always satisfied by meat. And then it's very similar to like the Western, you know, a tiger never changes its stripes type of thing. So a lot of them are very cross-cultural. And you can see like, you know, Guru Arjan's writing that in the late 1500s, early 1600s, and it's very similar to an English one. So there's not always of the case of that. People think perhaps that because of Western influence, some of these ideas came from England, from the West into Punjab, and people just made their own Punjabi versions of them. But that's not always the case as well. I mean, it's always a back and forth.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we say, you know, in England, we're obsessed with the weather, but of course, in the Punjab, it's a big agricultural community. So for them, the weather is really important. So for them to be able to predict it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah, wicked. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Aisha. Appreciate that. There was a question on the Q&A actually. Did you look and see if there was anything different happening across East and West Punjab, or was this kind of universal across that whole area?
That is a very good question. I did not. You know, this is a you know, introductory exploration into these. But I did see, when I did do research, I did see that people in Punjab have been distinguishing people. There were books that, you know, there was a book, and this is maybe something I can send out as a link when, you know, the following day. But there was a book that was talking about Western Punjabi proverbs specifically. So, you know, with that type of dialect, and you know, the dialects, there's so many different dialects in Punjab, and Punjab, as we know, has shrunk quite a bit, right, since, you know, partition, and then you have you know, Punjabi Suba movement, you know, the borders shrank again. So what we think of what Punjabi is has changed slightly over time as well. So there are dialects that people would say, modern day Punjabis would say, oh, that doesn't even sound like Punjabi, but it's like the Western dialect of Punjab. So yeah, that's something that needs to be explored for sure in English writing. But I know that there's Punjabi books that have explored that, but I didn't make any distinctions between them when I was writing this book.
Okay, let's, oh my goodness, we've got 39 questions and I've been editing them and 25 hands up. So let me just try a few more hands and then we might, I'll give you a few questions. I'll curate a couple of questions. Naresh Sharma, why don't you go next?
Hi there, how are you doing?
Right.
That's a great talk, thanks very much. And I work at SOAS, University of London, where I teach Punjabi, and I think your book would go down great in my language classes. I just want to say that I've really enjoyed this talk so far. And I wanted to share a little sort of saying that my nani used to say about my nana. And the context is that, and they were from West Punjab. So the context is that my nana, I mean, an adorable, loving man, he had a reputation of being very strict though. And everyone in the family was a bit scared of him. He used to love cooking and had a reputation for doing like a really mean barbecue and delicious biryanis and kebabs and stuff. And when, us grandkids, we used to dread sitting next to him at the dinner table because he would just keep on putting more food on our plates. And if we didn't eat much, he'd give us a really hard stare. But, it was all well-intentioned and, came from a really loving place. And we have fond memories of him, obviously. But my nani, she used to say of him, "Khwanda javaiyan har, vekhda kasaiyan har." So I don't know if you've heard something like that before.
No, please go ahead. Please explain it.
So khwanda javaiyan har. So he feeds you as if you're a son-in-law, and the sort of the background is you really look after your son-in-laws. So he used to feed us. But vekhda kasaiyan har, he'd look at us like a butcher, so like a butcher is ready to, slaughter its prey. It's got a really, he's got a really kind of like a mean look about him. Now, I don't know if that has any other meaning, this particular saying, but yeah, it's just something that she used to say about him, and it kind of like really fitted for us because he used to feed us really well, but then he would have this really sort of like strict gaze if we didn't eat all the food, and yeah. So that's yeah, just something I wanted to share.
That's amazing. That actually reminds me of a line. Again, Guru Arjan's using this type of proverb. It's a "Dis avd hai bahut pi halla sagda charan ki eho manrala." It's a line from Guru Arjan's Gurbani there, but very much the same thing. That on the exterior, well, this proverb is speaking. Your one is speaking about how generous he is, but from the exterior, he can look quite intimidating, mean, aggressive. In the same way, Guru Arjan, when he was saying that, it was like, I may look aggressive and I may appear like I might scare you, but really, I'm your servant type of thing. So it's very interesting, that kind of dichotomy there. But you see that type of element in the Punjabi proverbs, like that idea that you're always generous with your food, regardless of whether you're looking at somebody like a Kasai, like you said. That's an amazing proverb. I love that one.
Thanks. Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you, Naresh. Let's go to Navjit Sundar, who we know. Nav.
Hi, Jvala, it's Harnoor, it's not Navi.
Oh.
Sorry to disappoint you. I have a question in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read it out because I realise it's a bit lengthy, so you can ignore it once I've read it to you. So there's an assumption that Punjabi proverbs are very patriarchal. So most of the proverbs about men, they generally portray them in a face-saving manner, whereas proverbs about women, with the exception of mothers and daughters, are about how cunning they can be. And there's an abundance of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law proverbs that found their way into Punjabi folk songs, because proverbs are essentially folk wisdom. So I just wanted to give you a few examples before I ask the question. So mother proverbs, Mava Tandiya Chawa, which is famous in Kuldeep Manak song, which means mothers are like cool shade. And
Interesting.
Ma Razi Ta Rab Razi, self-explanatory, but essentially, if you keep your mom happy, then it's akin to, remembering God or keeping God happy. And then,
Anu, can you just get like a teeny bit closer to your microphone? Because you're just cutting in and out a little bit.
is this better?
Well, we'll have to have a shot today. Go for it.
Okay. And then mother-in-law proverbs, Sastati Mutapati, that's a famous one. And with sons, they're often presented as precious gifts. So Putra Jehimeve Rab Har Ik Nu Deve. Sons are like sweet fruits that should be given to everyone, right? So did you come across any of these gender constructions when you were researching proverbs for your book?
It's interesting that you mentioned some of these, because now that you mention them, I recognize that I've read some of these in older sources as well. So you mentioned that, Mama Tandiya Shama, that's in Kuldeep Manak's song. There's a story in the Suraj Prakash, 1840 text, when Guru Tegh Bahadur, I believe, I want to make sure I'm getting this right, when he goes to Amritsar and then he's denied entry there. It was the women of Amritsar who actually come to his, help, and they help him out and they treat him very well. And he says that proverb to them to say that, praising them, saying that, you're so helpful and you provide shade and you provide, comfort. So that text is 200 years old, and you can find that one in there. So, and some of these other ones, like I did mention, and some of them, in the Proverbs, there's a book. Actually, there's another question here about, what resources did I use? Now that I'm on the camera, I can kind of show you. This is a book, Punjabi Muhavara Ate Akhan Kosh. Muhavara means idiom, and Akhan is a Punjabi, specific word for proverb, although Muhavara is used sometimes loosely to mean proverb as well. But so in them, they do talk about these proverbs related to women. Some of them, I can't remember off the top of my head, were not that generous to women or daughter-in-laws. So, obviously I didn't include those. But, like in the questions underneath your question, people have commented saying, there are people doing research on this in the academic field. I didn't, obviously there are gender constructions when researching proverbs. Yeah, I did come across them. But I didn't include the ones that I thought would be kind of negative towards women. But yeah, these are great, the ones that you did share. Ma Razi Ta Rab Razi. There's a one similar, it takes the mother part out of it. Ji Sukhi, Jahan Sukhi. If you're happy, the whole world is happy, type of thing. But these are brilliant, and I wish I had talked to you before, but I included these. These are great. But yeah, did you have? Ones you wanted to share?
I had a few more, if it's okay.
Yeah,
mind me
please.
sharing. So this is about so when I said that mothers and daughters, the only exception where they're not perceived as cunning and they're praised. So Chiriya da Chamba, so it's the bird's nest. That's how daughters are described. And
I was actually listening to a lecture, so kind of like work-related type of thing. There's a really fascinating talk on Punjabi proverbs.
Hello?
Oh yeah, sorry.
I think that was an interference. There's another one, Sadi Chiriya Vang Udari, which is a famous, it's in a famous song by Narendra Biba. And another proverb, Mape Loka de Paga Nu Jamte, basically saying that when a mother or father raise a daughter, they're essentially raising someone else's destiny, because the daughter is temporary in her parents' home.
Right.
So there's a lot of these quite emotional about the daughter, these particular proverbs. I thought would be good to share with you guys.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, it definitely shows, a different side as well. Like I said, the Proverbs carry with them sentiments and values and ideas and stuff. And certainly, there is that, the praise of women as well that come through when you're sharing these proverbs as well. So it's not just, it's not one-sided in the sense that the culture is specifically or only, has negative things to say. There's obviously, like you said, very positive proverbs there as well. So no, thanks for sharing that. That's awesome.
All right, let's keep moving forward. No, thank you very much for that. You would be up for a free book, other than I'm pretty confident you've got a copy. All right, let's move on to a few more. Gurnaam Singh, why don't you go next? Gurnaam, if you take yourself off mute.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jvala. Some really interesting stuff there. We actually did a program on the Carl Channel a couple of years ago around Akan, and we got massive response. So clearly this is a kind of topic that people love to talk about, because it kind of brings up their childhood memories. And I can remember quite a few, and they're really about body parts and about the body. So there's some kind of misogyny and maybe even racial connotations. My mum always used to say to me, "Kale muh waliya, nile pera waliya." So I never quite knew what that meant, but it kind of had its effect anyway, because it was obviously a good telling off. But other ones into the body, again, there's one that's a dini niki or nitiki, but then there's a kind of riposte to that, which my wife often uses, which is jinna lama ona nakama.
So, translate them both, Gurnaam, please.
I think they're pretty self-explanatory. But
only if you speak Punjabi.
The smaller you are, the kind of sharper you are. But then, that's often a reply to that as well. The tall, because somebody who's tall that will maybe, kind of make fun of somebody who's small, but then they'll come back and say, but lama, the more tall you are, the more stupid you are, or kind of useless. So I think there's a kind of really interesting power play, the way in which, you could disarm people maybe using these things. And, it's almost as if he's kind of utilizing the power of language in order to challenge authority as well, yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's a very important point that you raised, is that there's a lot of back and forth. So just because we see one to say, to present one perspective, it doesn't mean that's the only perspective. That's the only proverb out there. There's this back and forth, right? Like proverbs are naturally witty. Like they're naturally meant for discourse, to be thrown back and forth, to be used in a convincing way, because, one small phrase, it brings along so much more meaning with it, right? So that all you need to do is throw that phrase out. Like I said at the start of the talk with that story, my nanny, my maternal grandmother, was able to convince people just with that one phrase, with that one line, even though, she wasn't that, as was the time, like she wasn't educated, she was illiterate, but she was still, very sharp, very wise, using kind of the knowledge, the wisdom of the past in a way that was convincing. And absolutely, you're right that it's a power play. And like, you see, there was proverbs in there that that get used in historical texts as well, that talk about, the sacrifices that Sikhs made, and we are like grass, like the more they cut us down, the more we grow. There's stuff like that. There's rebellious ones, and there's a lot of back and forth. It's meant for that. It's meant for that play. So absolutely, you're right. And thanks for showing both sides.
Just come back in. I think, yeah. Baba Faridji, much of his sloks are really in proverb form, and very cutting, very short and cutting. But there's one more that I've kind of come across, which is a very short one. It's probably the one that even Westerners know, is this Chakade Fatte. Does it mean literally, rip up the floorboards? Because I would have thought in the kind of olden times there were no floorboards there anyway. So what does it actually mean? Chakade Fatte. What does it actually mean?
I think it's like that's the difference between a muhavara and a proverb, right? A muhavara and a karn. So a muhavara would be an idiom. So an idiom would be like, if you were to say, oh, it went over my head. This is also why the proverbs are very important to translate and to give the context. Is that even if you know the language, and you see this with, if you're trying to teach somebody English and you say something like that, they'll understand over, they'll understand going over, and they'll understand head, but they don't understand what that phrase means, right? You have to know the context of that phrase, meaning, oh, that went over my head, I didn't understand that. Or Like somebody mentioned, you know, quite a British one earlier. If I were to say, you know, we're going to touch base. Touch base is, I've heard people in England not understand what that means because it's an American idiom, you know, in reference to baseball. So the context matters a lot. What you're speaking about, I think, you know, it was used in wood mills. Somebody can correct me properly about this if they know the real meaning to that. But it was just kind of an idiom to say, all right, let's go here. Let's get working. Or basically, it's kind of like it's an idiom used to pump each other up, basically. But the distinction between an idiom, a muhavara, and a khan, a proverb, is that a proverb is going to also not be taken literally in terms of the words used in it. But a proverb is going to encompass a element of, you know, value. It's going to have a philosophical component to it. It's going to have, you know, some type of other elements like that. You know, it's more of a teaching element. You know, it's going to teach you about values. It's going to be philosophical and that type of thing. So there's a distinction between idioms and proverbs in that sense. But for those who know better about that, please please comment on that when we invite more people in. But yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Gurnal. Appreciate that. Let's keep moving on. Well, let's take a couple more, Jvala, and then the biggest asked question is, how do you get access to your book? So that's going to be the one I'm going to finish up on. But let's ask a couple more people to speak. How about Raji Kaur? Unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, Raji.
Hello. Jvala, first of all, your name is so lovely. I really enjoy saying it, Jvala. I did have a question in the chat. I'll just read it out to you. Thank you for bringing these proverbs to us. I find my generation aren't 100% confident speaking Punjabi, unfortunately, much less stating proverbs. So this book is exceptional to help with that. Will you be on a pursuit to unearth lost proverbs? Have you ever worked with any artist to highlight a particular proverb you find essential, i.e. through music? Like, there's an artist called Raginder, I don't know if you know, and I think it would be really beautiful if you kind of collaborated. In my mind, I sort of see you, I don't know, doing something like that. Is that possible?
Oh, collaboration, absolutely. I mean, since the book, there's been a lot of thought as to kind of how to improve it for another rendition of it. And illustrations is exactly the next move to that, as well as, you know, including Shamukhi's script in there as well.
Yeah.
But also thank you for that kind word at the start. But yeah, definitely I'm looking for collaborations for people to work with. Musically, like Hernur mentioned, there's a lot of these proverbs in Punjabi music already. But yeah, to bring it to life even more, definitely, I think would be awesome to throw it in music, art, other literature, because, you know, the proverbs can be funny as well, but in a lot of ways they encompass a lot of our culture as well, right? So they show kind of the values, what we derive as important, social etiquette and all that. So
well, that's why it would be valuable, I think, for our generation, for them to connect with that, because I do think we've lost so much of our language through immigration, unfortunately. So yeah, thank you so much for the book, because it unearths all of that. If I could just share one that I've found, which I think resonates with females in my generation. It's very simple. I don't even know if it's a proverb, it's more of just a saying. Suno sabhi karo apni. So particularly I say with females because, you know, we are coming into this new generation where we are finding our own romances, finding our own careers, you know, whatever, we kind of take the lead now. And I think it's still really good to listen to others, but do what you feel is right.
Yeah, could you repeat that, sorry, for us?
Suno sabdi karo apni.
Oh, right, yeah, wicked. Yeah, absolutely. Take the advice of everybody, but, you know, ultimately you're going to be responsible for your own actions. So, you know, yeah, make that judgment yourself. Awesome.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thanks for sharing. Cool. No, thanks for tuning in and sharing those.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. Thank you, Raji. Let's go to Avninda Rao. Avninda, unmute yourself.
Hi, Jvala. Can you hear me?
Yep.
First of all, fantastic talk. And thanks, Amandeep, for organizing this. I've got two, which are probably the complete opposites on the spectrum. One is a very serious one, but actually makes us all understand a mother's role in everyone's life. Gunge diya ramja, gunge di ma samje. Basically, in very simple language, from what I understand, it means only a mother can understand her children, how they feel, even if they are dumb and cannot speak. I mean, that says about a mother, doesn't
I
it?
just heard from like upstairs, my mom just dying laughing at that. So
All right.
That's
So it resonates with everybody, right? But you know, like you said, these proverbs and do send out a very powerful message in everyone's lives. The second one, which we've used as children and heard it often, and I haven't seen it in your book, so I'm glad I can bring it up, is "Noso chua kaake billi hajnu challi."
I've heard that one.
We've used it ourselves so many times. It's like, you know, when
break it down. Break down the.
So basically, literally, it means a cat eats 900 meat and then goes off on a pilgrimage. And for me, that comes down to the fact that there are people I've met in my life who've done all the wrong things, and suddenly they become so religious and they become so strong about everybody else, and have this very narrow view of everybody else because they're not religious in the same way. And often we turn around and say, he's one of those not so too hakage billi hadu challi person. And Jvala, have you heard that one before?
I've heard that one used. I've heard that one used in my family as well. So it's. I think that's a common one, but a very apt, very funny one as well. Yeah, that's awesome.
Can I just add one more to this? Again, it's a very simple one. La ditti lohi taki karega koi. Simply, if a person loses his modesty, then no one can restore his dignity. Very powerful, but very simple.
Yeah. And you see the spectrum, right? You can see, you know, the first one very caring and very loving for mom, and then the second one also kind of poking at hypocrisy, and then the third one, you know, very somber and kind of philosophical as well. So yeah, there's so much range in these, right, that you can explore, that everybody would have fun with them. But yeah, thanks for sharing those. Those are wicked.
Thank you for listening.
All right, Abby, thank you very much. Let's go to Anjwalia. If you unmute yourself, Anj.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
You can.
Yeah.
Hi. One of my parents used to say to us all the time, "Nak to lake bulte rakti." So whenever she used to ask me to like take a plate into the kitchen or something, and I didn't want to, I used to leave it somewhere and not in the sink or something. So that's the line she always used with us.
Translate that, Anj.
So basically, "Nak to lake bulte rakti." So you get something that your mum might have said, "Can you put this in the sink?" But you don't put it in the sink. You just kind of like shuffle it along a little bit.
Because literally, what do the words literally mean?
Literally, they mean you've got it from your nose and you put it on your lip.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that?
Awesome.
I'm going to use that with my kids, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that one before.
Yeah. No, I've not heard that one, but that's an amazing one. Definitely to be used in the household, I think. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
That's okay.
Thank you. And let's see who else. Let's take one more.
I got really all of it.
And then we'll.
I haven't heard that one.
Then you can talk about how where you can get the book from. So let's go to one more. Parampreet Singh.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I have two of them. My 80-year-old father is here as well. The one I like is Vadda Sir, Vaddi Sir Dardiyan, which translate as the bigger the head, the bigger the headache. And my dad has one. Which one were you talking about? The Goldsmith? So sunyardiyan ik lohardi, meaning 100 hits by a goldsmith versus 1 hit by what would you call a blacksmith?
Blacksmith, yeah.
Yeah. So that's it.
Do you know in what context he would use that? You can ask him if like how he would use that one.
You want to come here? What context would you use that in, Dad?
Thing nearly patthar da jawab id naal.
Oh, okay.
ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਉਹ 100 ਵਾਰੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕੋ ਵਾਰੀ ਵਾਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹੋ.
Yeah, so he's saying that if someone is like maybe poking at you 100 times, then a blacksmith can respond to that with 1 hit.
Yeah, interesting. Very, very cool. That yeah, like you said, it's very similar to the Irtada Jawab Patthar one. So yeah, interesting. The fact that, you know, a blacksmith is going to hit very hard, whereas like a goldsmith is going to just, you know, just hit very little, right? It's kind of like a poke. Very interesting. That's awesome. I love those ones comparing 2 different things. It's like there's one in my book, So Chacha Ik Pio, So Daru Ik Kyo. So like 100 chachas, 100 uncles are equal to 1 father, and 100 bottles of alcohol are equal to 1 bottle of butter, basically. So very interesting. Like you mentioned, you know, some of these are very they're using also stereotypes of different castes as well. Like when you're talking about how a Sunyata would kind of hit very lightly, but a Lohad would just hit very, very strong. Those kind of ones are very interesting to engage with, but those type of ones I didn't put in the book, but it's wicked that you shared that. That's awesome, because it's very similar to the other one as well. No, thanks for sharing those. Those were awesome.
Yeah, thanks for writing the book. I'll definitely pick it up. Very grateful.
Thank you, Baranpreet. Great way to end that. A great example of this kind of intergenerational conversation and dialogue that you talked about earlier on. Now, look, the big question that's come through from 200 and plus people that have been online is, how do you get access to your book? So why don't you talk about it in the different territories as well? Because it's very difficult here in the UK to get.
Right. Well, basically anywhere. So if you're in Canada, you can order off Amazon Canada. If you're not in Canada, if you're in the UK, anywhere else in the world, just send me a message either on my Twitter or on my Instagram, or on my email. There's a Patreon link there as well. You can send messages to. Just send me a message about you know, you're interested in the book, and you know, I will ship one out to you while we are currently getting our stock up on the Amazon UK, Europe, and America sites. So quite simple. Just message me if you're outside of Canada, and I will sort it out. You just send me a payment, and I'll ship one to you. These ones will all be signed. Yeah, so it's quite simple, other than just sending me a message. But so if there's anything else, Amandeep, that you wanted to.
Yeah. So thanks very much, everybody. So write to Jvala if you would like a book and you're outside of Canada. There'll be an email coming out at the end of this, which will have his email address and other contacts there. If you asked a question, Baranpreet, Pam, Indy, Jaspreet, Pritpal, Avi, Aisha, Naresh, and you don't have his book and you would like one, write to me, message me after this, and we'll get a signed copy out for you, because I appreciate that you contributing today. Look, there's been hundreds of people online, which I'm really pleased at. There's more questions than we could even get close to answering. Jvala, if you pick those up and have a shot at some of them on social media, it just keeps the conversation going.
Absolutely.
Big thank you to you, not just for today, but also for stepping in, because this wasn't billed as your slot. And you stepped in when our other speaker dropped out at the last minute. So I'm hugely grateful to you for doing that. And thank you very much to the hundreds of people that are online right now. Next week, George Morton Jack, jump onto our website, register for that right now. Thank you, everyone.